have this coming.
What?
I have it coming. I deserve this.
You snap out of it. All right, first off, everything you did for your family. Right?
This isn't a unique take by any stretch, but for me, Breaking Bad is one of those cases of a story that constantly gets better as it progresses. It is the quintessential example of a show that continuously uses the foundations it sets in interesting and emotional ways, one that has a clear overall plan from the start and a knack for knowing where emphasis should be placed and how elements need to develop as things go on, which all makes it so that it works as a dramatic crescendo of a narrative that just gets better with time and payoff. Yet, although Season 1 is undoubtedly the weakest for me, Breaking Bad is still good from the start. It's great from the start, actually, and immediately begins building upon itself in a truly impressive way. But the episode that turned my impressions of it from "this could be something special" into "this is already something special" was episode 9 of Season 2, entitled 4 Days Out. After taking a test to determine how his treatment has progressed, Walt sneaks a glance at a scary-looking mass on a scan of his lungs, and combining that with the nasty recent spell of coughing he's been experiencing, Walter figures that the news regarding his cancer is not good, to say the least. He figures that he doesn't have much time left to live, and as a result, he decides to ramp up the meth-making operation so that he'll procure enough money to set his family up for a bright future, even if he dies earlier than originally expected. So to do this, he lies to Skyler and says that he's visiting his mother, and lies to Jesse by telling him that they need to cook as much as possible as soon as possible because their supply of methylamine is going bad. This sets him and Jesse up for 4 days of cooking, after which there will hopefully be enough production to satisfy Walter's goals. And what ensues here is a road trip into the vast nothingness of the New Mexico desert to make as much blue as possible, and everything seems to stop to take a step back and explore this situation. There are no highly dramatic or pulsating sequences, no explosions or gunfights. It's just a road trip. One that doesn't go as planned. This one is almost like a bottle episode, which Breaking Bad is known to do from time to time. One that offers us a look into the relationship and dynamics between these two characters at this point in time, providing a snapshot of sorts. And the image we get from this is actually quite lovely, because it can be argued that this period of time is where the relationship between Jesse and Walter is at its healthiest and most vibrant. They tend to annoy each other, quite a lot in fact, but here is where enough time had passed such that they had grown to also care for one another quite a bit. They're comfortable with each other, and there's a mutual respect. I mean, hell, Walter even feels genuinely sorry for assuming that Jesse's girlfriend would be a stripper, and expresses that he's impressed at Jesse's initiative in raising their prices. There's a camaraderie here, especially during the montage, where special attention is paid to showing how the two work together so well, and even to let us see Walter eating Jesse's Funyuns that he had seemingly been disgusted with earlier, only to throw them away to show that he is indeed still disgusted with them. But you get my point. They're genuine partners. One of the most beautiful moments in the entire series for me is when Walt surrenders to his hype and excitement to give Jesse a high five upon learning how much money they'd earn from this cook. And another is when Jesse gives his word that Walt's family will get their share no matter what happens, a sentiment that Walt absolutely believes and appreciates. Both moments occur in this episode, and it all really illustrates the bond these two have. And it was before Walt did such terrible things to negatively impact Jesse's life, before Jesse started seriously blaming Walt for his misfortune. And although he did lie to bring Jesse out here, this was also before Walt started applying some heavy, seriously immoral manipulation tactics to use Jesse in various ways. Though I personally maintain that he never stopped caring for him on some level. The time these two spent making meth here is kind of comparable to the perfect moment to die that Walter describes in his drug-addled state during Season 3's Fly, except here is essentially the most wholesome part of their relationship, after which the only place to really go was down. And partly as a result of this, 4 Days Out is a microcosm of a lot of what we've come to expect from Breaking Bad. The comedy, the fun moments, the stylish montage showing off the cook and locales, the beautiful direction, and eventually, the way it all inevitably gives in to darkness. The generator gives way, and due to Jesse's first mistake, the battery completely drains. Due to Jesse's second mistake, the remainder of their drinking water goes to waste, conflict and blame ensue, and panic slowly begins to set in just as much as the harsh desert cold. As what seems like a final resort, Jesse uses Walter's phone to call Skinny Pete to pick the two up, only to find out hours later that he went the wrong way before the phone dies, right on time. Walter's cough begins acting up, and Jesse realizes that he lied about the methylamine. They attempt to trickle charge the battery, and that doesn't work, and soon Walter scarily expels some blood. Things just keep piling on, going from bad to worse, and the two end up at their wits' end, devastated and full of desperation. It's a genuine roller coaster of ascents and descents, of hope rearing itself and being extinguished just as quickly, and it's a brilliant way of displaying how such a situation can shine a light on people, as Walt ultimately finds himself giving up and almost accepting the possibility of dying out here, and as Jesse decides that he's not having any of it and realizes that he has so much to live for at this point, leading to one last ascent where they are finally able to get the RV running through a makeshift battery. They then get the hell out of there, and the two are able to reconcile and reiterate their trust for one another in a beautifully genuine moment to once again illustrate this very real and very powerful connection they have.
I know I can trust you to,
Yeah.
But while all of that is absolutely wonderful, none of it really hits upon why 4 Days Out helped Breaking Bad pass that threshold for me. And I think the real reason that this episode sticks out in my mind is for the last few minutes, which culminate in a very raw and complex scene. The moment of truth arrives, and the entire family waits with bated breath to hear about Walter's test results. And contrary to what Walt expects, those results end up being absolutely wonderful. He is in remission, and his tumor has shrunk by 80%, and the nasty spot he saw from the scan was actually just tissue inflammation, with the coughing and blood being byproducts that, while not positive by any means, are manageable nonetheless. All in all, it's amazing news, well worthy of celebration. And Walt's initial response is just that, in a scene that is extremely emotional and heartwarming. Yet, after he leaves the party to go to the bathroom, we see his hands shaking under the flowing water due to what initially seems like relief. And that may very well have been a factor here, but soon after we also see that this quiet moment to himself actually ends up dissolving his initial happiness, until all that is left behind is a strange, aimless sense of bewilderment and a resultant anger. And this outburst initially seems strange, but after the shock dissipates, it becomes clear that this is the most appropriate possible reaction for a man like Walter White. He has spent his entire life disrespected, underestimated, and emasculated, and having not lived in the way he really wanted to, he is understandably bitter and festers a deep resentment that fuels an ego. And so that pride plays a part here. Getting a death sentence enabled him to live like no tomorrow in a sense on the path to providing for his family in his eventual absence. It's liberated him and allowed him to express his need for control through his growing confidence in his skills and through how alive he felt navigating those avenues. But that death sentence being revoked renders so much of that seemingly irrelevant in this moment. He did all of this as a monument to his genius and because he thought it was required, but now it may not even be needed, or at least not nearly as much as before. So, what was it for? What is the significance to his actions now? There is no tangible meaning to these deeds if they're not as immensely required as he initially assumed, so that diminishes their importance. And his ego can't stomach that. He did what he did and slept like a baby at night, knowing with satisfaction that he'd be able to die in peace having provided for his family. But living? That throws everything into disarray. This was a short-term plan that has now turned into something much longer. How would he continue to lie about this? What would the end goal be? The main thing he lacked in his life before the diagnosis was control. And he finally got it and grabbed life by the horns to steer things in the way he wanted. Cancer liberated him in this way. But now what? Is he now just along for some ride, and will he slowly fade away? Is he trapped once again as a passenger without any say in how things turn out? It's a lot to take in. Although, as prominent as this sort of idea is in explaining his outburst, there is another aspect to this that is perhaps even more significant.
I have it coming. I deserve this.
These words from earlier in the episode tell us so much with so little, and I believe they're honest because he has no reason to bring this up or lie to Jesse here whilst facing a seemingly inevitable doom in the middle of the desert. The concept of a death even more premature than he thought is what he sees as his chickens coming to roost for the things he's done. It's clear that on some level, he is remorseful and he isn't proud of his actions. And as a result, the prospect of an impending end, whether it be due to his cancer or due to being stranded, is somewhat comforting because it allows him to go out in this blaze of glory without having to deal with the consequences. This moment shows that in the deepest depths of his soul, he knows that he has done tons of things wrong. Yet before these thoughts had surfaced, perhaps he had subconsciously thought himself capable of ignoring this, and maybe he had nearly convinced himself that he was justified in doing this since he would be dead soon anyway. But as the doctor points out, his remission means much more time, and that also means that he has to face the reality of his actions. And that reality is terrifying, so of course he lashes out. The reasons he could use to justify doing this have evaporated, and now all that he's left with are his sins and shame. These are things that you can't come back from, and his out is now gone. But there's one last thing to dissect here that we can extrapolate from this scene, because dying in the short term would allow Walter to go out without having to potentially see himself change into something that, in this moment, he wouldn't be proud of. He started doing this for his family, but sticking around long enough might force him to face the idea that maybe his motives are shifting. Maybe he likes Breaking Bad, and maybe that's hard to come to terms with. That growing realization that perhaps he isn't doing this purely for selfless reasons. It's not a comfortable thing to come to grips with, and the prospect of death allowed him to ignore it. But now it's staring him straight in the face. I interpret this moment to be a crossroads, where Mr. White sees the growing influence of Heisenberg, is tempted by it and finds pleasure in it, yet simultaneously knows that it isn't healthy, so looks at his death as a positive thing for giving him an escape route before things go too far. But now that escape route may well be gone, and nothing but challenges lie ahead. For all of these reasons and more, everything boils over and Walt finds himself enraged. It's bizarre, it's visceral, and it's raw, and most of all, it's so very Walter White. And the way the dented dispenser now warps to reflect this twisted, bloody, monstrous self-image of Walt is absolutely perfect, leaving a haunting, foreboding tone in the air that hints at the devil he could become, and only proves to be confirmed as the narrative goes on from here. It is special, special storytelling, and it's one of the best moments in the show. As mentioned, this revelation is an intersection and a very important moment for the series and the main protagonist. Appropriately for this episode, it is a snapshot of who Walter is at this point and how he differs from who he was before, whilst foreshadowing who he will become. These complex feelings he has, what will he do with them? Where will they lead him? Now that he no longer has a distinct end goal and finishing line, where will he channel this ambition and his insatiable need for control in his life? All of these questions will get answered later, but 4 Days Out does a pristine job at posing them in such an ominous way in the first place, and for that reason, this is where Breaking Bad truly takes its first steps towards peak storytelling for me. Many thanks for watching.
It is growth, then decay, then transformation. It is fascinating, really.